All right, we're back. This is Yoga Talks Podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to you. How's it going? Are you okay? Let's just take a moment, everyone. Let's just take a moment. Are we okay? Because it kind of feels like the world is falling apart. Am I the only one who's been feeling like the world is falling apart? I don't know. It's been crazy, yeah? I mean, I don't even know what to say right now. It's just the whole thing. It's so absurd. I wouldn't even know how to begin to address it. And that's just like the larger sphere. In my own individual sphere, this week was just filled with so many curveballs. I wouldn't even know which one to talk about. There was too many. And, you know, this is coming out on the day of the eclipse. And maybe that has something to do with it. Like, things are wacky right now. But I am told that this eclipse is supposed to be marking new beginnings. And I'm just going to hold that close to my heart right now and carry on, because I don't know what else we would do, but let's just keep it together, okay? Maybe I'm just projecting on you and I'm just saying that for me, but whoo, we gotta hold it down, my friends. We gotta hold it down. Fortunately, I have a lovely talk for us to listen to. It's a perfect thing for us to listen to under the circumstances. Nischala Devi is here, and I always had some idea in my mind about her, and she so completely lived up to it and more. I felt very inspired by the talk. It happened in the midst of a chaotic day, and it was like this ray of sunlight, and I've been quoting her ever since. So I am very, very happy to be sharing this talk with Nischala Devi today. Before we listen to it, I want to also take a moment to just acknowledge you, the podcast listener, because the emails that you've been sending me have really been truly sustaining and wonderful. I am going through a lot of transition and difficulty right now. I plan to be filling you in on some events, but everything's just so in the middle of it. I can't even talk about it. I don't even have perspective on it. But the emails of kind and nurturing sentiments that you send me, and just to know that listening to this is in some way playing a role that's helpful to you, really is meaningful to me, and I really appreciate when you take the time to do that. I thought I might just read this one email that came in. It's from Kim, and the subject says, "Thanks for sharing. Hang in there. Good afternoon. Please continue with your work. I first listened to your podcast last summer in July. Since that time, many nights, you've helped me remove myself of the experience of dealing with my father, who passed away this April at the age of 87. It was not an easy time from January until April. The days and nights of phone calls from either my mom or the retirement center about my father that started on a very fast downhill turn with dementia. Listening many nights and falling asleep to the podcast gave me much relief. Thank you." Well, thank you, Kim, and I will most certainly continue. And it's messages like that and lots of others that I get, and just even the fact that you're out there and listening, even if you've never sent me a message, even just the energy of you, whoever you are, as a human being, choosing to take some time out and invest in listening to this, it's really fantastic. and I will most certainly continue to do it. I'm very excited to be bringing you some interesting people and talks going forward. So thank you to everyone. If you want to send a note to me, you can do that at the website, jbrownyoga.com. While you're there, you might check out some of the other stuff going on if you want to come meet me in person and have some practice with me, which is one of my favorite things when podcast listeners show up to a live event. I am going to be in Falls Church, Virginia, Sunday, September 10th. I'm going to be in Tokyo, Japan, September 29th, October 8th. I'm going to be in Tarrytown, New York, November 5th. You can find out about those events along with listening to the archives of this podcast or reading through my blogs or checking out my online yoga video stuff. All of that can be found at jbrownyoga.com. All right, I think that's it. I think we should just get straight to this talk with Nischala, and I'll touch base with you guys on the other side. Yeah, let's do it. All right, you guys, here it is. Let's talk to Nischala Devi. Hello?
Hello, did we do it?
I think we did it.
Oh boy, I had real bad technical problems. Okay, we're good now.
No problems. Well, I called your husband, I think, on accident.
Yeah, well, because we're both abundant well-being, but I'm not, fortunately he was still here. He was ready to leave, so we did good. But anyway, I don't know why you couldn't find Nischala Devi. But,
I did just type it in again, and I found there's like a bunch of them, though. There's a couple of different accounts, and one of them, they got some different usernames. But we got each other now, and how cool is that? I'm so excited.
Totally cool.
Nischala Devi, I can't believe I'm speaking with you.
You're sweet.
Well, it's funny. Like I talked about this a little bit when I spoke to Donna Fari. There's just a few people who, like, when I first came into yoga, like in the early 90s, who were there, and you've always been someone I've been aware of, like an important figure, and then you put out that sutra translation like a couple years ago that was, I felt, hugely significant. And so, I don't know, I think of you, as I said, and I hope you'll take it in the best way, as like a kind of a unicorn in the yoga world. Somebody I just always have heard of but have never met, and so I'm so excited.
That's so funny. That's so funny.
Thank you.
I do take that as a compliment. I love unicorns.
Good.
If you were going to say something else, like an old crone, I wouldn't have taken that compliment, but a unicorn is good.
Okay, cool. Well, I have two young girls, and I don't know, unicorns are very significant creatures in our house.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. How old are they?
I have a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
And there's a chance they could burst in on us, but I think we're going to be okay.
Okay. Well, I don't have any kids. I don't have any dogs.
Okay.
And the plants are well behaved.
Oh, good.
So we should be okay with that.
Cool. All right. Well, how are you today? What's going on with
good.
you?
It's crazy, but I'm getting ready to start a training on Friday, a 10-day. So life just is crazy around it. But otherwise, it's good. My assistants are coming in and the books are coming in, and it's just a lot.
Yeah, especially those intensive formats,
my God.
It does become your whole life for those days,
Oh, totally. That you can't, I was thinking this morning, how am I even going to check email? It's such an intense course, but anyway, I'm good. It's just, there's a lot going on. So
cool. Well, listen, I want to take a little time to talk about some of your history, and the thing that stands out to me most when I first look at your bio is that you did make a choice to become part of a monastic discipline,
right?
And I personally, I've always kind of thought as monastic disciplines as, on some level, and I look to stand corrected, like kind of a bit of a suppression of the feminine,
Interesting.
That almost like it would mean that we're not embracing certain feminine aspects, like we give up sex and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. But is that feminine? That's both.
Well, yes,
Masculine.
that's true. It's
Yeah.
both.
Yeah.
I guess I think of it like this, like, how come there's not a woman standing next to the Dalai Lama who's of equal spiritual stature and
Oh,
like looks
thank
like a
you.
woman, you know?
Yes.
So,
Thank you.
so I think of that. I think of you, son, because you defy my ideas that I have about it. You know what I'm saying? Like, you've been
Uh-huh.
in a monastic discipline. You are a woman figure who looks like a woman when you see her picture.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I don't know, talk to me a little bit about like your choice to become part of a monastic discipline. When did that happen for you in your life, and why did that happen for you in your life?
Okay, so we're on now. We're recording.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay, okay. I didn't know if we were just chatting or what. That's probably one of the most interesting questions about the monastic path that I've ever heard. Most people don't have that kind of insight. I mean, most people go to the sex part. That's the first thing they go to, the celibacy.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot more to it. For me, we took 4 vows. We took the vow of poverty. We took the vow of chastity. We took the vow of obedience, and we took the vow of selfless service to the humanity. So the understanding was that the first 3 vows helped us with the 4th. And that was always my way of thinking it. You know, if it helps you to live a life that you're not in an intimate relationship with someone, then that's great. But if it hinders your ability to serve, it really doesn't make sense. So this tradition that I was in for almost 20 years was an ancient sannyas tradition. And when we call it monastic, it's really, the tendency is to think of it like the Christian church. And it was very different than that, because even though we may have lived in a monastic setting, a lot of us were very secular. We went out, including myself, we went out and did other things and lived that particular way. For me, the hardest vow was obedience. It's not my strong point. And it's not because I'm rebellious by nature. I don't really think of myself that, but I think of myself more innovative than rebellious. And when I see that something needs to be done in a certain way, that's my tendency, is to just go ahead and do it in that way. So I think the 3 supporting vows were what I let go of when I left the monastic path and kept the vow of service to the humanity, because that to me was the most important one. But think of monasticism like this. It's a training. So for instance, if you want to be a great musician, and if you talk to the greats, they will tell you that at a very early age, for instance, I remember hearing the story of Joshua Bell, the great violinist. And his mother was a piano teacher, and what he would do is he would take rubber bands and he would place them around the knobs on his dresser and start playing them at the age of 2. So I think, but he still had to have a certain amount of training after that, even though he had the aptitude. So how I think of the monastic path is it's a wonderful training. It helps you to train your mind. It helps you not to have attachment to possessions, because you don't really have anything that you call yours. Yet you have to take care of the ones that are part of the institution, either the ashram or the convent or the monastery. So it's a wonderful training, and some people choose to stay there their whole life. And some people choose at a certain point, okay, now I have the training and I can go out into the world. I think that monastic training makes the world a little bit more palatable, should I say, because you know that no matter what happens out there, there's always a place inside to go.
Oh, that's so interesting to me. I've never really heard of it described as like a training as opposed to like a life path, because I spent a good couple years being as monastic as I could in the East Village.
Okay.
Like I kept a very tight diet. I was celibate. I was doing kind of intensive sadhana. And I spent a good couple years, and I certainly got so much out of it, like discipline,
Right.
deep inward experiences that totally transformed who I am.
Right.
But at some point, I remember I was having very blissful experiences in my own sadhana, in my own monastic little cave in the East Village. But my life outside of that, like my relationships to other people, and like I had a lot of problems there. So in a way, I was having these very blissful inward experiences in meditation, but like outside of my life kind of sucked. And in a way, it seemed almost as if that meditation that I was doing was making my life worse because it wasn't translating into my life.
Right.
But when I began to try to integrate those experiences that I was having and make my life more like that, then things really started to click for me. So that's a really interesting idea that monasticism doesn't necessarily mean you give up your whole life forever, but there's a set of tools that you would gain from that kind of discipline, which I agree does give you that sense of, oh, wow, I can always return inward and be okay.
Yeah. And some people may think of it as a forever because, in fact, we did take eternal vows. And I don't feel like when I left that it was any kind of difference. Maybe I wasn't celibate anymore. Maybe I had my own possessions. But again, I held that service as the highest. And whatever helps me to do that service best, to me, takes on the monastic path. And again, and I think it gets back to your original statement or question. I think this is more of a feminine way of looking at it. And also, I transformed the vow of obedience into obedience to my own self, the higher self, instead of an outward figure. What is the best for me at this very moment? And it puts the responsibility back on the person instead of on somebody outside of you, whether it's an abbot, whether it's a mother superior, whatever it is. This puts it back on you, and it says, how can I lead my life? And the point you brought up was so good, because the inner and the outer need to have some kind of alignment. There can't be a total juxtaposition between what you're feeling within and what you're experiencing without, because that, I think, makes people a little bit off balance.
Yeah, it certainly did for me for a while.
Yeah.
But I think that's also what I've come to understand as more of like a tantric teaching, that tantra is about integrating into the world, not necessarily transcending it.
Right. But in the integration, there can be a transcendence, because what happens is you see the world as a wonderful playground, but you also see the impermanence of it.
Yeah.
How everything changes. Like right now, I'm looking out at this beautiful, lush green forest, and they're all deciduous trees. Within a couple of months, there won't be a leaf in sight. So that's the change that happens, and to accept the change instead of hoping that will always be green. If I want it to always be green, I should not plant deciduous trees, right? So this is the kind of thing to me that brings the spiritual into the everyday. Instead of fighting what's in front of us, we accept it with the way of knowing that there is a change in the outside, whereas the inside remains steady.
That's quite beautiful. Thank you. I'm also wondering, how old were you when you went into the monastic order?
Young.
Young. Like how young? Like teens, 20s, 30s? You don't have to give out actual numbers. Like what stage of life were you in is kind of what I'm after.
Yeah, well, it was because I was educated in medicine. So it was after my medical education.
Oh, really? I thought that you had done the yoga first, so you already were a doctor before.
No, not a doctor. I was a physician's assistant.
Okay.
So so it was something that as a child and a young adult, I was very much in the spirit. And then when I got into teenage and above, you know how life changes. But I knew I wanted to serve people. So I thought medical was a really good way of doing it. And I got, of course, disillusioned with that at some point. But
how so? How did you become disillusioned with medicine?
Well, that's why I got into yoga. I think in the first place, I was working in medicine, and I realized that even though they were very good and they've gotten better at physical body, they neglected the other parts of us. They neglected the mental, emotional component, which now they're incorporating more in, but they definitely ignored the spirit. And to me, the spirit was the essence of who we are, and we're all disease manifested. And then when I started studying yoga, I realized that was their understanding of it also. So it was, and I got disillusioned because I knew there were other ways to work with people that was not giving them drugs. I'm talking about prescription drugs, not street drugs. But it was not known to medicine. So I left medicine with actually the first time I left it several times, but the first time I left it with the words, I have to find out who I am first before I can work and treat anybody else.
Physician, heal thyself, right?
Exactly. Absolutely. And, it was just frustrating because I would see people with high blood pressure, for instance. And I was working with a very compassionate, loving physician. And I would go in and I would say the person's blood pressure went up. And he would look and he'd say, raise the meds, raise the medication. And I knew the last thing this person needed was more medication. But I didn't know what else to do with them. I didn't have the tools. So when I left to find out who I was, I also found out who everybody else was at the same time. And then I realized a little deep relaxation can lower blood pressure. Some simple asanas can help circulation, etc.
How about a little bit of diet? How about we talk about what you're eating?
Exactly. All that came together. And then I took it back into medicine.
Right.
So that's how I worked the different aspects of my life. And also with the monasticism. That's why I can go on and lead retreats for people to take them inside, because I had all those years of experience being in that situation. So I feel like the different parts of my life came together and blended nicely. And that's why I was able to be in medical research using yoga.
Wow, well, that makes a lot of sense. So you start out in the medical world and you become disenchanted and you figure, I got to figure out how to heal myself or be in myself before I could help anybody else. And so you seek out yoga. And how does that happen? What's like your first ever yoga class that you went to?
Well, it's an interesting story. Well, the first ever yoga class I went to was quite a few years before I was kind of figuring out what I want to do in my life or what I want to do when I grow up, which, by the way, I'm still trying to figure out. I took some classes, and they really were much too physical. I'm not a physical person, and they were much too physical for me, so I let it go until I had moved to San Francisco, and I was working in a medical clinic in the Mission District, for anybody who knows that area. It was pretty rough at the time. And I was working very, very long hours and pretty exhausted, too exhausted to make myself dinner. And so there was a little restaurant nearby called the Good Karma Cafe. And I would go there because they would sell their lunch leftovers for, I think it was $1.50 or something. And I had dinner every night there and met some people. And this one man, we were sitting across the table from each other, and he looked at me and he said, "You look exhausted. You need yoga." And I said, "I don't have time for all that. I'm so busy. I'm working so hard." And then I got sick 2 days later. And he had told me to go to the Integral Yoga Institute, which is right down the street. And there I walked in, sick, tired, not knowing what to do with my life at that point. And I took my first yoga class, and voila, that was pretty much it for me. And I realized that there was more to yoga than the physical, and then started getting much more involved at that point.
Wow. So I've heard that story before. I've had Sam Rudra Schwartz on and Jivana Heyman. They both describe a similar thing at some point in their lives, walking to the Integral Yoga Institute and being like, there it is. Oh, thank you.
Well, that's what I walked up the steps. We have this beautiful institute in San Francisco and Dolores Street.
I know it. I lived in Bernal Heights for about 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah, for like one period of my life. I worked on
building.
18th in Valencia. And so I kind of know the area a little bit from a long time ago, but I bet it was different when you were there than when I was there, even to now.
It hasn't changed that much, except a lot of wealthy people have moved in. That's the main thing.
The rents are higher now. There's no $1.50 dinners at the Karma Cafe anymore.
Oh my God. So when I walked up the steps and I saw Swami Satchidananda's picture on the outside, and just before I rang the doorbell, I looked at him and I thought to myself, I don't know what he has, but whatever he has, I want it. Because he had a sense of joy on his face and peaceful joy. And I thought, wow, that's what I want. How do I get that? So that's one of the reasons I became so involved, working from this crazy medical clinic and swinging the other way, and then somehow bringing the two worlds back together again. And that was very important for me, and still remains very important for me, to have that balance of the inside outside. And the outside pulls us much more than the inside does, but to really make that time every day to go inward and check in and say, who am I today? What do I need? And how much can I give?
And you saw that picture of Swami Satchidananda, and if I'm not mistaken, you did actually get to meet him in person too, is that right?
Oh, not just meet him in person. I traveled all over the world with him.
So how do you get
for many years?
How do you get from the Integral Yoga Institute to traveling with Swami Satchidananda?
That's a very good question. First of all, it was a much smaller sangha in those days, much smaller group of people, and then. Now that you say that, I'm just wondering, how did I get it? So because I was in many different centers. I was running the Denver Center, then I ran the LA Center.
So you became involved in the organization, just like managerially running places?
No, I was teaching. I started teaching. In those days, you didn't have teachers training like you do now. You basically took a few classes and studied a little bit with the master, and then at a certain point he said to you, start teaching.
Right.
So I did.
I've always said that, like, you went to class every day for like a couple of years, and then one day your teacher turned to you and said, okay, you're ready. I need you to cover for me next week.
Exactly. That's how it happened. Yeah. And of course, I also knew the human body from being in medicine. And then, I was eventually moved to Connecticut, where we had the first ever holistic clinic in the United States, and started working there. And then I started doing teachers' trainings. And I think from there, I started getting invited there every year in Switzerland. At that point, there was a huge European Union of Federation of Yoga Teachers conference. People came from all over Europe. And I started going there. And then from there, I started traveling with Swamiji to the different countries in Europe. And I went to India with him. And then also within the United States. So I think it was a sort of a gradual, very organic process that I became one of the main teachers in integral yoga.
I see. So you're just being involved in the organization led to going to that gathering. And do you remember the first time you met him?
Swamiji?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, of course. It was not long after I started going. He came to San Francisco, and I met him there. Okay. And, it's just, again, in those days, he was much more accessible. Well, of course, now he's not in the body anymore, but he was much more accessible. And he needed people like me to go with him because he did the lectures, but he needed someone to teach the classes.
Interesting.
And that's what I did. So I would go with him and I would teach, and he would do a lot of the lectures. And I wasn't his secretary. He had his own secretary that, took care of him personally. But I was I was a teacher, and then eventually I wound up living in Europe and teaching all through Europe. And, life just evolved.
Yeah. So at some point you became more involved in his direct teachings by doing the practice part while he did the lectures part.
Yes. And then I started giving lectures also, because he would say, well, I'm not going to give a lecture today. Why don't you do it? Right. So I would give a lecture. And he really groomed me on how to speak. And he was extraordinarily gracious. One of the things I think I remember so much about him. And I learned that graciousness from him. When someone did something for you or invited you, it was a very gracious. He never took it for granted or was flippant about it. It was always something that he felt honored to be asked. And then I also went with him to Russia. We did a big meeting of the ways kind of thing in Russia. Went with him a couple times there. So I felt like that was my on-the-job training.
Right.
Of how I didn't realize I would be then doing this work.
That's pretty large scale too. Those are like big audiences, right? That's not like a small little 10-person yoga center. That's
no.
That's a big show.
I was talking to thousands of people.
Yeah.
And
taking yoga all over the world.
Yeah, and because remember, this was the time that it was not accepted. This was when we first went to Russia. It was still the Soviet Union. And yoga was really forbidden, actually, at the time. So we went in under clergy and healers instead of yogis. And because it just wasn't allowed. And then the second time we went back in, it had opened up, and we actually did the first ever yoga conference in Russia, in Moscow.
Wow.
So, and then I went back also and started talking to the, I'm laughing, the military doctors about the work I was doing with cardiac patients at the time. So it was quite an amazing time. It was, when everything was really opening up and people were wanting to learn more and more about what they were forbidden to learn before.
And it still hadn't been become a mainstream thing here in the West at all.
It was starting to. Yoga was starting, but the medical aspect had not.
No.
But yoga was starting to be, because a lot of the masters, if you look back historically, a lot of the masters started coming in the late 60s and 70s. So by the early 80s, there was a lot of yoga going on. Bikram was here. Iyengar was here. Of course, Yogananda had come before. Swami Kriyananda, Swami Vishnu Devananda, they all had come. Yogi Bhajan. And so they were all stirring up this spirituality that had been more or less covered up by our materialism. And they were stirring this all up, and people were really flocking to them at that point. I mean, we used to do silent retreats with 200 and 300 people. And then the 90s came and people got more materialistic again and kind of let go of a lot of that. So It was happening here in the U.S., but it hadn't happened in the rest of the world yet.
Wow. That's so interesting to me. I mean, just the way that you talk about, I've talked about it on the podcast a lot, sort of the progression of how those masters came over, and then that just, it spread from there.
Right.
And to kind of correspond it with the 80s, I grew up in the 80s, and I think of it as such a superficial time, just like fluorescent clothing and bad music,
Right.
And the idea that kind of at the same time, simultaneously, there was kind of this thing brewing.
Oh, a huge groundswell was happening at that time.
Yeah.
And you have to remember, these were really yogis that came over. So when they taught, they didn't just teach one aspect, except for a few exceptions. They were teaching what I would consider the full yoga. They taught us to serve. They taught us to love. It was Swami Shivananda, a very simple man who never did come to the United States. He always said, serve, love, give, meditate, realize. And that was, that's
pretty concise. That's a pretty concise formula.
He was very concise. Yeah. And most of the masters that came, that's what they did. There was nothing that said to us, just do asanas. Asana was just to keep you fit to do the rest of your service.
But see, that's sort of what happened, though, in the 90s is when it became more of a fitness thing, right?
Yep,
that's when
it became a fitness thing.
Yeah.
And also, there was a very interesting switch there, because up till, I don't know exactly dates, but when the masters were still in their full bloom, so to speak, yoga was free.
Oh.
Nobody paid
They
for
weren't
yoga.
making any money? Swami Satyananda wasn't getting paid for those lectures?
The lectures he might have gotten paid for.
Yeah.
But the yoga classes we didn't get paid for. We charged $1 for a yoga class.
Wow.
And this is actually a funny story, because we had a little basket and it said $1 donation, because everything was nonprofit. So nobody was making money, so to speak.
Yeah.
It was all going back into the organization. So we had this little basket and it said $1 donation. And people started complaining. They said, the teachings of yoga are free. You have no business charging for them. This has been around for 5,000 years. So we talked to Swamiji. We said, this is what people are saying. What do you think? And he said, they're absolutely right. So we took the little $1 donation sign and tore it up, and we made a new one. And we said, $1 donation. The teachings of yoga are free. The $1 pays for the electricity, for washing the towels. And we listed what the $1, these people were happy.
Yes, yoga's free, electricity is not.
Exactly. That's what I tell people. I'm fine, but United Airlines wants their money.
Yeah.
So then suddenly what happened when the money came into it, and people said, wait a minute, I can make money teaching yoga. See, because we were taught also in those days free. The teacher's training was free, because it was understood that after you finished the training, you would teach for the institutes or the ashrams or whatever it is.
Yeah, there was always a lineage. And I
Yes.
remember always back when I came in, the way that you had any credibility was you cited your teacher.
Exactly.
Nowadays, I look at bios and you don't necessarily know who somebody studied with. But when I came up, that was all you had to offer, all you could say,
Or if they did study with someone.
Wow.
Most people nowadays don't.
Yeah.
They're goats. They take a little bit from here, a little bit from there, a little bit from here. We were taught to be cows. You stand at one place and eat. And then you bring it up afterwards and you decide what fits you and what doesn't fit you.
Right.
Okay,
so at some point you decided that doing the work at Integral or teaching with Swami Satyananda wasn't what you needed to do. You decided to leave. So why and when and why did you decide to leave the monastic order?
Well, that's a complex question. Let me answer one way very simply with a little analogy, and then maybe go into it a little bit deeper. Why did I go into the ashram? is the first question.
Okay.
I went in because I wanted to go deeper within myself and have a certain protection from the world. It's a little bit like a tree. When a tree is first planted, you have to put a little fence around it to keep the animals away. But as the tree gets bigger, not only do you take the fence away, but the tree now protects those same animals that would have destroyed it. So I went into the ashram to learn to be free, and I left the ashram to be free. At a certain point, the constraints and all the wonderful rules that had helped me learn who I am and helped me be able to meditate and do the other practices became too tight. And I felt like in order to continue my spiritual growth and development, I had to leave the constraints of the organization and be on my own. But remember, it was after 20-some years.
Yeah.
So it wasn't. So I was really steeped in it by that point.
And that's what I'm asking, because it seems like that would have been a pretty hard transition to make.
Oh my goodness, you have no idea. It's like getting out of prison.
Yeah.
It's just, you have no name, no clothes, no identity, no history, like trying to get car insurance. Forget it.
Oh my God.
Well, where have you been for the last 20 years?
Yeah.
And I remember
what do you
going
say? At the ashram.
That's what. And going into the supermarket because I hadn't cooked for myself. It was all given to us. And trying to decide what kind of mustard to buy.
And there's a lot of options.
When I went in, there were like 2 options. When I came out, there were like 40 options.
But that kind of goes with the whole marketing thing, and yoga too, because the reason they do that, I just had a conversation with like a marketing person about this, is if you made one really like the best mustard ever, you would not sell as much just having that one as if you made many different types with different little things. You know what I'm saying? And that's what's happened with yoga too. Like there's lots of flavors of yoga now because that helps sell something.
That's what people say to me. What kind of yoga do you teach? I said, yoga.
The full yoga. I like the way you said it. The full yoga.
It's like Baskin Robbins, right? They have 31 flavors, but they all start with the same ingredients.
Yeah.
The flavor is added at the end.
That's right.
And that's the way I feel. And I'm happy to see that there's so many different styles because it attracts different kinds of people. People who are more physical, people who are more devotional, people who are more cognitive. It's wonderful. The only thing is we have to understand there isn't just one aspect to yoga. And the best way to practice is to embrace them all completely.
Okay, so did you find like a new yoga community outside of the organization, or you still have a relationship to the org? I'm still curious about this transition out of it and going to buy the mustard.
Yes. Well, no, I didn't have a community outside of it. I went, in a way, back to the medical community because I needed to earn money.
Right.
I had no money.
You had to get a job.
I had to get a job, and I had really anything that I made while I was part of the organization went right to the organization. I made no money. So when I left, I had nothing. I didn't have rich parents, so I really was kind of at a loss. And I still had that really deep feeling that when I teach yoga, I shouldn't be charging money for it. So I decided that there were other things that I could do that were within and again, this is all within me. It's not that charging money is wrong, etc. Actually, what I say to people is, don't charge for yoga. Charge for everything else. Charge for your education, charge for your gasoline, but let the teachings be free. In your own mind. Not you don't have to say this to anybody.
No, it's a good distinction. I really like it.
I think it's a great distinction. Actually, it's funny because my cousin is an American Airlines pilot, and he hates to wait. And they spend a lot of time waiting around.
Yeah, American Airlines isn't so good for that either. I don't like American, but
So he said, this is his mind. They pay me to wait, and I fly for free. So it's really that same kind of thing. So because I had a history while I was in the monastic order with working in research with Dean Ornish, when I came out, I called him and I said, I need a job, basically. Do you have anything
I'm
for
sorry,
me
you
to do?
had already met. If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.